This presentation is on the Mayans, in which argument I found to be the most persuasive in explaining why the civilization declined and why the people left the land. The picture on the slide shows a beautiful Mayan land before the decline. The Mayans were a successful and well-known civilization in the early years of advanced people. The Mayans had a good sense of how to run a civilization and prosper, but a natural disaster is what caused their decline. To start off, a drought is defined as a large period with low rainfall that results in a shortage of water. The three regions of the Yucatan Peninsula where the Mayan civilization inhabited that were affected were the western lowlands from 760 to 810 AD, the southeastern lowlands from 811 to 860 AD, and the central lowlands from 861 to 910 AD. The most persuasive argument of why the Mayan civilization declined and the people abandoned the city is the idea of drought, because the natural disaster is uncontrollable, drastically affects inhabitants, and is long-lasting. The picture on the slide shows the three phases of abandonment of the Maya civilization, which corresponds with the three droughts mentioned on the last slide. The picture shows where the drought occurred first and where the Mayans abandoned first. The picture helped form the points that I will argue throughout the presentation. Droughts are one of the natural disasters that no one can control today or in the early years of civilization. The Maya civilization experienced a drought in three stages for nearly 150 years on the Yucatan Peninsula. Farmers in the western lowlands were affected greatly. The freshwater lagoons used for agriculture were affected in the southeastern lowlands, and the central lowlands had the highest population, so they were affected greatly because they needed the most resources out of all three lands. The drought for the 150 years drastically changed the community and drove the Mayan civilization out of the land. Today, if a drought lasted for 150 years, we would most likely get water from other countries, and we have well thought out filtration systems. But in the Mayan civilization, there were little ideas of how to filter the water the civilizations have today. A drought for 150 years would not be good in our civilization either, but it most likely affected the Mayans more drastically since it was over 1,200 years ago. The picture on the slide shows land that is dry and cracked, that cannot support any life because no vegetation could be grown there. The land shown could have dried up after only a few years, while the land on the Yucatan Peninsula experienced drought for 150 years. The land on the three regions on the peninsula probably lost all the moisture within the first few years of the drought. The idea of the land you live on not helping you survive is scary, let alone having to leave the land you know so well. The Mayans most likely began to migrate to other parts of the Yucatan Peninsula and eventually left for another peninsula after long years with no rainfall or very little. The drought majorly affected the inhabitants of the land like the Mayans, the animals kept by the Mayans, and the land on the peninsula. Humans lose the ability to grow crops in mass quantities and are unable to keep the animals alive and lose the luscious land. Humans are also affected because there will be very little drinking water that could lead to many health problems. Animals are affected by the lack of water because their source of food is the vegetation, just like grass. So the animals have no source of food and ultimately leads to the Mayans losing their livestock as a source of food. Land itself will be affected because it dries up and has no moisture left. With no moisture in the soil, the vegetation will not grow. The land becomes sparse as the drought continues on. The Mayans used a complex system of canals to carry water for crops, drinking water, and other jobs. The canals would lead to reservoirs that the Mayans used frequently. The canal systems having little to no water in them can lead to an effect for the inhabitants. The lack of water could lead to malnutrition of the people and dehydration, which will drive out populations as large as the Mayans, and could eventually lead to death of some people in the community. The picture on the slide just shows how intricate the canal system was and how advanced it was for 1st century. The cause of a drought can lead to many effects for the inhabitants because it is an intervening variable relationship because one single cause led to many different effects. So internal warfare is also an effect of having little to no water because the competition for resources become intense. Communities will fight for food if they have to in order to stay alive. Resources are needed in order to live, and the lack of water leads to less crops, less animals, and less inhabitable land. The various communities of the Mayans on the Yucatan Peninsula would begin to compete for the resources, leading to an internal war, and the Mayans could drive each other out if the competition intensifies enough to a breaking point. Question time. How does internal warfare ultimately lead to the decline of a civilization? Think about some possible solutions. Okay, so competition for resources is usually where internal warfare begins, because the things that keep the civilizations alive are becoming sparse. When civilizations are in internal warfare, the people use other resources for tools and weapons like wood and metals, which eventually will diminish as well. The land could be destroyed by the war, and the land is already sparse because of the drought. Sometimes the people use animals in war, which could lead to less animals for jobs and overall food. Lastly, if the Mayans had rulers or a hierarchical system, then they could potentially die in the warfare. Overall, the internal warfare can limit even more resources, land, and the people to help the civilization. Lastly, the lack of water can lead to the decline in trade relations. Trade relations are usually what helps civilizations survive and strive, because the sharing of ideas and materials help all involved. The Mayans exported salt, jade, cocoa, cotton, vanilla, and many other raw materials. The Mayans also shared writings and other knowledge in mathematics and science with surrounding communities in order to prosper and keep up with the changing knowledge and intelligence of the early years. The Mayans used the canals to trade long distances, and with low water levels, it was most likely that the trades could not happen or would not at all be efficient. The Mayans needed the water in the canals to get raw resources to the sea and other raw resources from other countries that they did not have on their own. This picture on the slide shows the fact that the Mayans traded on land to other communities, but also traded by sea. The sea routes are highlighted in blue, which wraps around the perimeter of the peninsula and extended out to other land. The canals led out to the sea to make trade possible. Not only sea, but the Mayans traded on land with various communities. The exports are listed on the left side of the picture, which shows just how many raw resources the Mayans had during the most successful times of their civilization. The drought affected the production of those exports, which could have led to the decline as well. Droughts are long-lasting natural disasters, and the drought on the Yucatan Peninsula lasted for 150 years. The land could take months and possibly even years to fully recover to support a large population again. The lack of rain hurts the moisture of the soil, and it takes a while for the land to become worthy of agriculture again to grow many different crops in large quantities. The land most likely took a long time to reabsorb the nutrients and moisture that is needed to be lively. The land itself would be hurt and might never fully recover to its full potential like it once was for the Mayan civilization. In conclusion, the drought in the Mayan civilization era is the main cause of decline because it has many effects, including the fact that drought is 1, uncontrollable, 2, it hurts the inhabitants, and 3, is long-lasting. The inhabitants being affected has many other effects, including the damage of the complex canals, the malnutrition and dehydration of people, and the effect on sea and land trade. An important fact would be that the annual precipitation decreased between 41% and 54% relative to today during the period of the Maya civilization's collapse. This fact shows that the drought was one of the most immense events in early history that led to a decline, all because of a natural disaster. The picture on the slide shows what researchers think the Mayan civilization looked like in the most prosperous period. The 150-year drought would have changed the look of the entire land because of the loss of all vegetation, including the trees and grass. The land would only have the stone structures left behind, but the Mayan land was thought to look very green and healthy before the drought that ultimately declined the civilization altogether. Thank you. The end.